Welcome to a special out-of-band episode of Adventures of Alice and Bob. In a change from our usual format, we're going to be talking about the expansion of the BeyondTrust family following the recent BeyondTrust acquisition of Entitle, a pioneering privilege management solution that discovers, manages, and automates just-in-time access and modern identity governance and administration across the entire cloud. To help us dig into what this means for the PAM market, find out about the journey Entitle have been on, and discuss what the future looks like, I'm delighted to be joined today by my podcast co-host and BeyondTrust CTO, Mark Mayfrey, as well as the newest members of the BeyondTrust family, Entitle co-founders, Ron Nissim and Avi. Ron and Avi, do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having us on the podcast. I'm Ron. I'm the CEO at Entitle. And it's been leading Entitle for the last few years. Avi and I started our journey together in the Army many years ago, and always joke that we were drawn towards access management is what we call the boring part of cybersecurity, but obviously super important from a risk perspective. And I'm really excited to dive a bit more into what we've been working on and what the future holds alongside and with BeyondTrust. Avi?
I am Avi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Entitle. I am Ron's founder.
Well, great to meet you guys, and thanks for joining us on the podcast today. Before we start diving into the Entitle story, I think we should start with the BeyondTrust journey that led up to this point. And Mark, I'm going to put you on the spot here because I know around 2 years ago when you first joined BeyondTrust, you spoke about there being these timeless security concepts out there around least privilege, but that technology itself doesn't stand still and we need to keep moving. So maybe you could walk us through the journey of the last couple of years leading up to the exciting announcement we've had of Entitle joining BeyondTrust, the BeyondTrust family, and what the plans are for the future there.
Yeah, cool. Well, welcome guys to the podcast. Awesome having you guys on first and foremost. It was interesting. The two and a half or so years ago when I rejoined BeyondTrust, one of the very first company kind of kickoff presentations that I gave was talking about all the kind of timeless parts of security that we focus on. Things like least privilege, privilege management, etc. But the importance of understanding while these things are timeless, right? Technology doesn't stand still. Where and how you apply it continues to evolve and so forth. And also there was the backdrop of, what I think is coming to the forefront now, that identity security is really kind of a central mode of thinking for a lot of possible of compromise the right identities that have the right privileges. And that's typically where kind of game over ends up happening, right? And so there was twofold things that we wanted to do. I always talk to the team of there's new things that we need to build into our existing products. There's entire new products that we need to build, like what we did with Identity Security Insights. And then there's things that we're going to need to acquire, right? Because we want to continue to add great talent to the team to amplify everything that we're trying to do. And we've obviously been kind of on a journey on the build side of, in the case of building something like Identity Security Insights, focusing on surfacing what are all the different paths to privilege, right? It's not just the who's directly assigned domain admin or global admin, but like what are all the ways that an attacker can gain access to privileges, illuminate that so you can do something about that. And that's kind of the core of what we built with Identity Security Insights. But another big thing for us is it's one thing to illuminate all the problems, right? We also want to make sure that we have a modern approach of how do you just eliminate standing privilege in the first place, right? How do you put a great access kind of request or approval flow around it that's policy driven and so forth. And so we definitely had been keeping an eye on the market and what was happening. And the punchline, as I think we know from the start, is met these amazing people at Entitle, equally amazing products as equally amazing people that had a kind of shared vision of how do we see this kind of evolution from privilege access management and how it's traditionally been into kind of the broader identity space. And, while I say the terms like identity security, I think it's like a giant nebulous term in the security industry. So our version of identity security is we want to protect privileges and access, right? We want to be the best in the world at doing that and enabling security teams. And yeah, I'm just extremely stoked to be able to work with the amazing talented team at Entitle and what kind of lies in the future.
I think that's a fantastic intro to us there. And we're all really excited to have Entitle on board. Ron, you mentioned in your intro there that you started off with this idea as the boring aspect of security there. So what was it that drew you to the boring side of security, and why did you think this was such an important thing? What was that problem you set out to solve when you founded Entitle with Avi?
It's a good question. And honestly, it really underscores our entrepreneurial journey because as frankly, two security researchers, we were really drawn towards what we were looking for as the hardest problems in security, right? The sexy, low-level vulnerability research. And we frankly embarked down that road because that's just what we thought was cool. And when we started embarking on that road, we kept talking with a bunch of security teams and we asked them, so like, what do you think of this, like, identifying problems in the kernel and things like that? And they're like, that's really cool. But what I actually care about is my customer success team has access to all of my customer environments. And, that's a problem. Or, in a different world, people are reusing the same passwords in many different environments. And that's what I get compromised. That's what I'm worried about getting compromised for. And essentially we realized that the core aspects, the core challenges in security are still often what we would consider very basic, right? Access management is not a new problem. It's one that's been around for decades, but yet still unsolved. And I think that really puzzled us early on because we had to understand why, despite this problem being old and frankly existent for a while, why was it not solved? And we can talk more about what led us to start Entitle, but that's kind of from an idea perspective what led us to focus on access management early on. And then as the company evolved, obviously, we kind of moved left and right in a lot of micro pivots that allowed us to focus on, for example, security teams. And access management has a lot of different stakeholders: IT, GRC, DevOps, security. And so realizing that we wanted to solve the security challenges in access management, and again, many different aspects of that. But that was what was the origin story, I think, of our focus on access management.
It's interesting that you were mentioning the background and start of like the vulnerability side, or kind of like the exploit that side. Like very, very similar for me. That was always my like original kind of fascination in security, and then had what sounds like a kind of a similar realization where you're like, I mean, this stuff is cool, but people are kind of struggling just to like what I consider the eat your vegetables of security, right? Mm-hmm. Like just getting the basics right is often overlooked because everybody's kind of chasing the next interesting threat actor name or whatever else, right? Versus like how do you kind of build more resilience and stuff.
Yeah, I read in an interview, I think it was you that was talking about it, Ron, that you've got, these large companies out there, big enterprises, they have traditional IGA tools, they've got teams trying to control these access to all these systems, right down to the very small companies where there's just a completely manual governance process out there, people having to, wade through, and most of the IT help desk tickets are all just to do with, I need access to the system. And what I read was you were thinking about this, and then you had this aha moment where you went, actually, the problem itself isn't the governance there. Could you just talk to us a little bit about that aha moment and how that came about and what your insight was there?
So I mentioned that access management has a lot of different aspects to it and many different parts of the business. One of the core challenges with that was that we spoke with security teams. Security were frankly focused on the governance aspect, often from a compliance perspective. Right, compliance mandates often user access reviews and cleaning up in retrospect. And what was interesting is we spoke with security teams, and a lot of the question was around obviously least privilege and remediation and removing unused access. And we were really fortunate that we spoke with the IT and DevOps teams as well as the ones that did the actual work. Security teams often define the policy on who's allowed to do what, but at the end of the day, someone has to open AWS and write a policy, or open Salesforce and add an administrator, or open SharePoint and change the ACL. And oftentimes the people that do the actual work are the IT and DevOps teams. And we were fortunate that we heard their side of the story. We heard what they had to do in order to deprovision access. And oftentimes it was very manual processes with ServiceNow and Jira and tickets and messages and phone calls and, hey man, hit me up. I'm on call. I need access to this or that. And that manual process had a lot of direct burden on the business in terms of SLAs for tickets and, that time it took to get access and, so on and so forth. But indirectly downstream, the security team was then faced with having to clean up all these issues that originated with a manual process. So just to give a very naive example, someone wanted access for a week, the IT team would obviously provision that access. And, if they were lucky, they'd set a reminder in their calendar a week down the line, remember to delete Mark's access for so-and-so. And then the person responsible, the ones that own the risk for the access being persistent, was not the IT DevOps team. So there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of responsibility, because the people that own the risk of the permissions are the security team. So they're, as security teams, always having to chase what the IT DevOps is doing and make sure that the access is being removed. And so realizing that was kind of the origin of it, realizing that we had to create a platform where IT and DevOps and security were communicating in a centralized way, basically being aligning interests, so that we're automating the work for IT DevOps, so they don't have to do the manual work, but also enabling security teams with the governance that they needed. And so basically, there's the classic, if you put your clothes in the closet, you don't have to clean your room every week. And it's this kind of the same story, right? Like, how do you create good hygiene to begin with, so that you're not having to clean up every day?
How do you know what my closet looks like, man?
Mark, I know a lot of things.
It's all just black hoodies. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And then, Avi, from like the technology perspective, how did you start, making those workflows, making it easier for people to achieve these things? What sort of challenges were you facing there when you were building out Entitle?
Actually, in the beginning, as Ron mentioned, we created a workflow engine that people can grant permissions by approval flow. And then some of our customers took us to, let's do it for everything. Why people should not have privilege at all? And one of our few customers invented the concept of zero standing permissions for everything. And in the beginning, the platform was not really looking toward pure JIT, but more we can think about a PAM solution. And then Miko pivoted into this layer of the JIT access, and then they started looking more into the ongoing care of the permission. Let's say about the journal mover lever that we addressed with bundles and policies, and another pillar to that will be the user access review. So we kind of staged it, but it was an amazing journey.
You mentioned one thing on the bundling of the bundling of privileges. I think it's one of those great examples of one of the things that we loved about what you guys do is a lot of times in security, there's always that kind of the security team of no, don't do this, don't do that. And what ends up working for security in the business is more how do you enable people, right, to just get their job done, the least amount of friction in the most secure way, right? And I think one of the coolest things about Entitle and what you guys do, and that you guys have a shared kind of vision and culture around thinking is exactly that, right? You want to kind of reduce that friction while still adding security. And so maybe kind of expand on the bundles aspect, whichever you wants to take it, of what you're trying to do there, the kind of bundling of permissions and simplifying those requests.
Sure. So in the beginning, bundles had we had the vision of people want to bundle things together, and customers took us to a completely different theme of. They looked at bundles as an abstraction layer. Let's say someone need access to Figma, and in the organization, access to Figma is granted through Octagroup. And for the end user, they don't know that Octa_ users is Figma users is the group that you should join in Octa. So they just created a bunch of bundles and called them Figma. And then this idea pivoted into something else we are calling currently virtual applications, but bundles still remained. And people just look them as business unit roles. Let's say on-call engineer, this is the access they need. It can be in multiple platforms, and they will be provisioned in one access request. And that way, the end user have a really good experience. So they know exactly what they need, because they are usually requesting that bundle over and over again when the business needs happen. And also they don't need to look around because it's predefined for them.
And I think it's that good example of, the kind of hello world example I give is your business, you have that level 3 support technician who in a lot of cases might have to break glass, get access to customer environments. And for a lot of companies, it's just like standing privilege to a whole bunch of systems. And yeah, they're a very important role in your business and you should try to protect them. But the reality is all that access is there 24/7 exposed. And, there's obviously some kind of, different technology doing various bits of just-in-time access flows. But being able to do it in a unified platform way that you guys do, I thought was an amazing thing because it fits with how people actually are trying to get work done from a business perspective. I'm the level 3 support technician that might need a temporary GitHub access to push some infrastructure as code, some AWS access, and I want to do a quick request for all of that. And maybe Ron, if you could expand on one of the things I think is great is you have the flexibility of policies, right? Because there's some scenarios where you want that just-in-time access to privilege, and I always kind of joke, it's like you want the nuclear bunker, 2 people to turn the key at the same time, like super manual kind of dialed in. There's other times where it's maybe privilege that you want to put under kind of lock and key, but you want it to be like, automatically approved via other means. So just maybe to expand on the kind of policy side of approval and so forth.
For sure. And I'll start with taking a somewhat different direction. I'll backtrack back to that, where permission management is a complex challenge to solve because it is very business specific. It's very hard to come out of the box with a one size fits all solution because businesses are special because of the way that they do things. And you can't come from the outside and force a business to adopt a new process or a different way of doing things, because what got them to being successful and having the revenue they have and having happy customers is because they're doing something right. And so no one from a security perspective really like what you said, right? About security's job is at the end of the day to enable the business. And so we had to create a very flexible tool. And when we started creating these self-service workflows and just-in-time access, frankly, the answer is not everything. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Not everything needs to be just in time, and not everything needs to be super, governed and privileged and controlled. Rather, there are a lot of places where you would optimize for business efficiency. And so what we wanted to create was a platform that you could explicitly, deterministically define that balance in our platform, where high risk resources would get a certain type of policy and low risk resources would get another type of policy. And that would be part of your risk appetite, what you as a security team define is right for your business. And so the one way of doing that would be, how long is the access available for, right? If it's very privileged, maybe I want it available only for an hour while you're on call, while in the office, many different conditions, versus things that could be provisioned indefinitely. And the other is places where you wanted to create a more flexible approach on attribute-based controls and basically auto-provisioning these sets of permissions based off of what we called policies. So policies is essentially Entitle's take on attribute-based controls, but with attributes being both on the person, the identity, and on the entitlement, the permission. And so you could say, for example, engineers are allowed to have access to all dev resources, or, US employees are allowed to have access to all US data and are not allowed to have access to all European data. I'm obviously abstracting and simplifying a bit, but just for illustrative purposes. And those conditions are both on who you are by integrating with your MDM and your HRMS and your IDP and all these different applications that tell us who you are on one hand, and then integrating or enriching rather the attributes on the resources so that we know which databases have a PII, or we know which roles are administrative roles, or we know what region this information is. And so being able to be that glue in the middle that connects these permissions with these people. Historically, the way this was done, it's not that this is it's a new concept. It's the way that it was done in the past is often through Active Directory groups, which I'm sure you've seen many organizations do, right? You create an AD group, you call that AD group, DevOps, and then behind the scenes for every application, you attach that to a group. And when you want to ask the question, what permissions am I provisioning to my DevOps team? That is a very hard question to answer. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to turn the policy on its head, where you would explicitly tie between sets of resources and sets of identities versus implicitly by group membership.
No, makes a ton of sense, man. There's a few things he touched on, like, for some folks when they think of kind of going on the journey of implementing something like just in time, depending on the size of the company, there's many ways that they could approach it, many areas they might start. Like, how do you guys think about it as far as like, what is the way for somebody to kind of get started, right? Like started down the path of implementing just in time? What should they focus on first? Because I think sometimes in security, we can tend to want to, boil the ocean. There's like the whole phrase like perfect's the enemy of good, or just getting going, right? So how do you think people should go about kind of starting or starting to think about just in time?
I have two different answers for that. One, I think, is one of the fun things about the space that we at BeyondTrust, that's going to be new for me, but we at BeyondTrust are focused on is frankly as privileged access. And what's exciting about focusing on privileged access is that the return on investment is clear and quick. Access management projects are big because the business is big, and they're complex because the business is complex. And privileged access is narrowing the scope in a way where you can have a lot of success very quickly. You can control your top 10, 20, 30 applications, identities, privileged identities, within an hour, 2 or 3 or a day. And the amount of impact that has on the business is very high, because those are, at the end of the day, the identities that are targeted the most, that are the highest risk, that have the base blast radius. And so that, for one thing, and one part I think is really exciting. And frankly, one of the best ways to think about just-in-time access is, how do I focus on the places where I care the most about these identities or entitlements? So that's one thing I'd say. The other part I'd say is, at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, there is a form of just-in-time access already in every business. And the way that looks today is, you have your policy. Again, that's probably an Active Directory or SailPoint or whatever you use. And then there's always, for every rule, there is the outlier. And that outlier is a Jira ticket. It's someone sending a Slack message to your IT department. It's someone giving a phone call to the person in charge of the GitLab repository. There's always these outliers that are sidestepping the policy, and these outliers exist whether you like them or not. They're already there in your business. And so the idea of automating those sets of tickets, those outliers, and just creating, streamlining them from a business perspective, but B, centralizing them so you know what's going on, you know what people are requesting. I think that's powerful, and B, there's no change to the business because that process is already happening. It's just not under your control and purview.
I think one of the interesting things with getting started with JIT in general, we all know that JIT is a highly effective thing to do in a company. It helps protect that sensitive, data in sensitive environments. You need it to comply with certain regulatory frameworks even, yet there isn't kind of that mass adoption of it and use of it. And I think one of the things is, when you get started, and this is the thing that struck me when I first saw Entitle, was I actually want to use this as an end user, because I'm looking at it thinking, actually, I want to do that because that seems like a really easy workflow for me to get access to things without raising that ticket, without doing that. So do you find when you start working with a project that the product actually, through that user experience, that great sort of UI aspect of it, and building those workflows and self-request flows and integrations that you have, do you find that product almost sells itself to an organization?
Almost too much.
Yeah.
That's how you end up with 150 integrations.
Not only that, but sometimes like we try to strip the POC because they're like, this is amazing. Let's all bring my InfoSec, or let I bring the IT people. And we're like, no, let's keep it narrow as possible because we don't want to boil the ocean.
It makes sense. And I like what you guys are saying, though, is like that. I think sometimes in security, or like when you're building security products, like there's the end user that you normally think about, which is like the IT person, security person using. And then there's like the real end user, right? Which is like that business person that might have to interact with Entitle, the DevOps person. They're not like your direct user. And like, it's something we always talk with like the UX team, right? Of like, there's those two levels of who the user actually is, right? And I think there's many security products that forget that. And I think to James's point, that was my first thing too, which I think gets overlooked sometimes with security products, where I'm like, oh yeah, I would just love using this as the actual end user, right?
And it's an interesting one, actually, because if you look through the Entitled stuff, you've got 150 integrations covering everything from, we'll go to A to Z, AWS to Zoom
A to Z
in there. And with such a diverse, A to Z, yeah.
You can say A to Z.
With such a diverse range of integrations.
You can let the British out.
A to Z. Okay. Yeah. Don't let the king hear me. So you've got this huge range of, use cases, all these different business users, personas using the product. What have been the use cases or integration requests from customers, where that POC has gone wild and everyone wants to be involved? What are the use cases that surprised you with a problem that you hadn't thought of before, or an integration you hadn't even considered?
I have two examples that I really like. That one of the powerful things about creating a flexible platform is that it enables our customers to be creative in ways and solve their own problems in ways that we wouldn't have thought of from a product perspective. And so it's a product led approach, which enables us to learn on the fly. And two examples which I thought were pretty creative. One was a company created a policy saying they integrated with their know before, which we didn't have a knowledge management or learning management integration. So they integrated with their know before using a Lambda script that we have an open API. They integrated with their know before. They ingested who had gone through which training, and then created policies around which information, which entitlements you could access, which entitlements, folders, documents you could access based off of which training programs you had undergone and were active. And they did that on their own. They didn't talk to us. They had their API, they had their documentation, they went out, they built this out. And then, in our, biweekly customer success calls with them, we joined the call and they showed us what they built. And we're like, this is awesome. Like, why didn't you guys tell us? Like, we've done this ourselves. But it was easy enough for them to do it on their own. They didn't have to even contact us. So I think that was a proud moment for us in that we had created, again, a flexible enough platform where they could go on and do that. But then also, obviously, 2 weeks later, we had productized this into our product because it was such a powerful use case, we thought. That one's a bit more straightforward and was productized, and it was just a great learning experience. And one that's a bit more niche and I thought was pretty cool is we have a very intricate audit log. And so another company had integrated our audit logs on privilege escalations with their key card entry system to know if you were in the office or not in the office. This is a very kind of more old school business, very office centric company, to know if you were in the office when you had elevated those privileges or not. And that, that's not going to be a part of the product. We're not going to develop that, but it was so easy for them to do on top of their SIM, given our audit log.
I think that just really highlights the flexibility and that need to align to what the business wants to get out of it, rather than just trying to force a model on them or do things in a certain way, actually making sense of this is how we operate as a business. This is where we consider our risks to be. So these are the controls we want to put in place, eliminate the standing privileges as much as possible, and then use those things in their environment that matter to them, that drive those outcomes. I think that's a fantastic example of those flexibilities and the creative ways you can think about this, rather than the thing you were talking about earlier, where you end up with so many AD groups, so many nested things, so many RBAC, ABAC, whatever it is, policies that become very quickly impossible to manage. In fact, one of the things I think I've heard you talk about in the past is the birthrights problem. Could you maybe explain the birthrights problem and how that impacts organizations?
Yeah, and I think this ties a lot into Mark's earlier question around policies and, birthright access, RBAC policies. All these are kind of beating around the same bush. And I think the reason this is kind of one of the holy grail questions of access management is that security and IT teams alike know that if someone needs access to something that they don't have it, there's going to be shouting, there's going to be screaming, there might be violence. Like, no one likes not having the access that they need. And so birthright access became one of the biggest questions because everyone wanted to foresee the future, basically make sure that you had what you need before you even knew that you needed it, so that you wouldn't have to open a ticket, you wouldn't have to wait around for someone to not have that access. And so I think that was one of our early realizations from our product perspective, is that one of the biggest reasons companies were talking about birthright access so much is because the ticket resolution process, the process around resolving and remediating and provisioning access that did not exist, was long and tedious. And so the need to foresee the future became really high. And I think that's one of the things that became powerful about self-service access, is all of a sudden the idea, the dream scenario is that tomorrow morning you could delete everyone's access in the company and it wouldn't be that big of a deal because everyone would just regain the access that they needed. And, self-service manner is simply regaining the access along the way as they encounter their need for it. Obviously, that's not necessarily what you actually want to do tomorrow morning, but from a solution perspective, the idea is how do you streamline the process so that there isn't as big of a need to foresee the future and guess what people need. That said, you still want to create some sort of birthright policy, right? And so I think our flexible approach around ingesting attributes, both from the system and on the identity, creates just a more future-proof policy that, if you do it through AD groups or things that are a bit more static, is just harder to maintain over time.
Absolutely. And I think, we've obviously talked about the challenges that you've, overcome there for customers, the user experience, the things around just in time. All these benefits sound great, Mark, but what we're going to do with it from a BeyondTrust perspective, where are we going next? What's the next steps of this project?
I think the most important thing and definitely importantly for Entitle customers is just to continue to amplify and support what Entitle is already trying to do, right? It's an amazing platform and technology for doing just-in-time access and access reviews on that. And so however we can help amplify, right? I think sometimes with acquisitions, companies think about these things wrong. And so I'm just looking to amplify the amazing folks that you're hearing from today and the whole team. There's definitely some amazing ways, I think, of how things come together in the future. So for us, we look at it as being the unified JIT platform for BeyondTrust for everything that we do, right? So we'll end up integrating it with the BeyondTrust products to have that as kind of a unified plane, whether you're getting just-in-time access to some of the different, vaulting capabilities or secure remote access or privileges in other ways, or even endpoint privileges and so forth. On top of all the 150 plus, third-party kind of privilege orchestration outside of the BeyondTrust products. I think when you look at things also that we've been working towards, like identity security insights, right, where we want to be able to illuminate, what are all the different paths to privilege. There's twofold of how do we make sure that we're illuminating all those paths to privilege, and then helping you put the kind of standing privileges that don't need to be standing, that could be under a just-in-time kind of access request policy. How do we help shift that over? So I think there's going to be some very strong interplay of kind of what we're doing from an insights perspective, from an Entitled perspective. And so those are a couple of the bigger buckets, I'd say, of what we're excited from. But like I always kind of say, also just want to hear from all of our shared customers, right? Like, what are they actually looking for beyond the plans that we already have, right? So we're very excited about the future and what we are able to do.
And as exciting as the future is, the present is also pretty exciting. So, Ron and Avi, you've joined the company at a pretty exciting time. Our new Identity Security Insights product's just been named an overall leader in the Cupping Cole ITDR Leadership Compass. Our Go Beyond customer conference is on full swing in its world tour at the moment. I think we've just been to Miami as the latest destination. I know, Ron, you've at least made it out to a couple of the events, and Avi, you've been seeing all the things that have been going on there. So I'm curious how you've been finding this exciting start at BeyondTrust. What topics of conversation have been coming up? What things you've been finding out in those conversations?
I think for me, frankly, the number one thing that stood out is that everyone at BeyondTrust are actually friends, not like work colleagues. Like everyone actually likes each other. I don't think as trivial as that sounds, that I don't think it's trivial at all. And so, really happy to, from a company culture perspective, I think there's a lot of alignment, and we all know that in these types of integrations, I think the number one thing that leads to things not working is culture mismatch. And just, I was so happy to see that that risk was totally off the table, and that we're just all very aligned. Janine, the CEO, likes to say that we take our work seriously, but not ourselves seriously. And I can get to start quoting her on that as well, because it's a good mindset approach in terms of work hard, have fun. We're solving real problems, and being driven by the problems that we're solving. But also, James saw you in London, and enjoying London a bit is also okay, which is awesome.
Excellent. And I'm assuming that you're all friends at Entitle as well. That you and Avi are on speaking terms, and there's
No, Avi just filed for divorce. Is that?
He's had enough after all these years.
Never.
He wants to go back to the sexy side of security. Avi, how's your experience been? How are you finding it?
Exciting. I am anticipating the large trajectory in growth of our product and a lot of customers coming on board, and we are excited to build something amazing.
Yeah, no, that's really great to hear, and I'm glad you guys are on board and you're appreciating the culture and like the work hard, play hard thing here. And like you say, Janine is absolutely that we've got to take the product seriously, but we don't always take ourselves seriously, and you've got to have fun while you're on that journey.
Let me ask you, James, as my main right hand on things. How are you thinking about everything, especially from like the security kind of practitioner side of the house? What does this all kind of mean to you?
Great question. So I'm just really excited to see JIT and zero standing privilege is something that, I've been really interested in for quite a long time of getting into products. There's a lot of the things we're trying to deal with at the moment. My team works a lot on the identity security insight side of the house, and just seeing that sprawl that's gone out as, hybrid environments, cloud environments, all these paths to privilege we're uncovering in the research initiatives, these recommendations we're making to the customers of the product saying, hey, there's this privilege here that you didn't realize that had because this user has access over this application, which has this level of privilege here. So being able to actually apply some controls and do it in a user-friendly way, this has always been the battle of the kind of eat your vegetable side of security. If you want to take privileges away, you want to do least privilege, but then you're making this trade-off between security and usability. And there's such a great balance with Entitle, and seeing that as kind of a gateway forward for us to start to really enable some of those workflows, bundle things in with our existing products. So I'm really excited for the direction we're moving forward there of the eat your vegetables, boring side of security, whatever we want to call it, because it doesn't matter with those controls in place.
The stuff that works.
The stuff that works, exactly. I mean? It's the thing of, I don't care if the attacker stole some credentials, exploited a vulnerability to get code execution, however they came in. If that identity that's been compromised, if that system they've got onto has a least privilege approach, it's going to be better secured. You're going to be better defended. So that whole concept around attack surface reduction and the direction we have moving forward, I think is really exciting there.
Cool, man.
Now, we're almost out of time here, but I've got 3 founders of successful tech startups here. So I think in true Alice and Bob style, we need to ask you what advice you would give someone who's listening to this podcast today, who's thinking, I've got an idea, I've got a plan in mind, I want to start my own business, my own service, whatever it is. What advice would you give them to get that off the ground and get that idea going?
I could jump in first. I mean, it's a similar advice I give to kind of like, thinking about like leadership or just personal goals or anything. Like, I think at the end of the day, whatever you're trying to achieve in life, you just got to be very honest with the person that you see in the mirror every morning, right? On like, what do you do in the work towards that? That there's many other factors. I think there's a lot of people just getting past the initial like believing in yourself to even start something, whether an entire company or a project. I've said before that even for myself, I think people are always kind of surprised by it, but like there's not a day that goes by that I don't have some version of that feeling of like imposter syndrome of like why me, how this, everything else, right? So there's a healthy kind of bit of ego in a good way, right? In the sense of like you got to be able to believe in yourself enough to even take the chance in the first place. Then you got to be honest with who you see in the mirror of, are you actually doing the work, or is it just something you're saying you'd like to be able to do, right?
Appreciate that. I think you've stolen that advice from Ted Lasso, but we'll go with it. Avi?
Probably. That probably was.
Avi, what's your advice to someone who's got an idea and wants to get going with their own adventure?
This is actually an advice that Ron and I got at the beginning of our journey. As Ron said before, we wanted to do all the sexy stuff, and then we found some other ideas. Is always listen only to people that are willing to pay you, and not some like people that are just talking about some random ideas and problems, and be really customer focused and try to solve their problems and not problems that you imagine that are existing. So just interview as many customers as you can.
That's really good advice. It reminds me of the guys who founded, I think it's Five Guys, the burger chain, and basically their dad told them, you need to do things that people are willing to pay money for. That's selling a beer, giving a haircut, or making a burger. And they went with making a burger and, did very well out of it. So yeah, great advice there. Ron, over to you.
I mean, I'll be still mine. I'll just build off of that because it really is the beginning of our existence at Entitled. It's every step of our journey. Someone said recently, I heard, if you ask someone their opinion, they'll give it to you regardless of how educated it is, how much they actually thought about it for that opinion before they gave it to you. And so being really customer obsessed and understanding who you want to listen to. There's so much about entrepreneurship, which is going against kind of norms, right? Going against what people are telling you. And so there's a lot of value in talking to as many customers as possible and understanding what their real needs are, as opposed to a lot of people that are 1 or 2 or 3 times removed from the actual problem that you were trying to solve. There's even when you talk to customers, right? You got to talk to the person that's facing the problem that you are trying to solve. Organizations can be big, and there are many times you'll talk to someone, they say, this is not a problem that I'm experiencing, but I know John over there, and I think John has these problems. Well, then go talk to John. Don't take this person's word for it. That's kind of one of the classic entrepreneurial books is the Mom Tests, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, that we were becoming obsessed with, and understanding what the right way to interview a customer is, and making sure that you're not leading them with your with what you believe to be true, but rather you're actually open to feedback and to being wrong and to being told that things should actually be done differently. Because throughout your process, there are going to be so many things that change as an entrepreneur and the company. Even when you think you got it right, it's probably going to change 20 times after that. And so keeping on edge, there's this magic moment everyone likes to talk about in startups about reaching product market fit, right? But that's not a point in time thing. It's BeyondTrust has product market fit, but we have to continue to innovate to maintain a product market fit, right? And so even large companies are facing this problem. And so, of course, smaller companies it's the biggest problem to tackle.
Absolutely fantastic advice there. And I think we'll have to have you guys back on the podcast at some point soon to see how this journey's going.
Last time.
The first time, not the last. Exactly. Yeah. It's been a fantastic talking to all you guys today. So thank you so much to Ron, Avi, and Mark for joining us today on Adventures of Alice and Bob. I know I'm biased here, but like I said, I'm really excited to see Entitled join the BeyondTrust family on our mission to protect identities and access from cyber threats, and really can't wait to see what the future holds for us all together. If you want to learn more about Entitle, BeyondTrust, or any of the topics we've been talking about today, visit beyondtrust.com. We've got information on the products, we've got blogs, we've got webinars, and we'll have a lot more upcoming information about how BeyondTrust and Entitle are shaping the security market moving forwards. As always, thanks to super producer Ben, quality control Kramer, and the team at BeyondTrust who make this podcast happen. I'm James Maud, and this has been Adventures of Alice and Entitled.